You got your abs popping and you're just walking around. I think where this is gonna lose a lot of people, and could have ripped my gi off. I could have ripped my gi off, but I didn't. You know why? Because I was stupid. Gonna realize that they have to do a lot of work up front for this. What I'm saying is, without a caloric deficit, you cannot lose weight. We're going to show you how to create one in this video. All right, guys, welcome to part 2 of our weight cutting series, where we talk about optimizing fat loss instead of muscle loss for grapplers and fighters. You may remember part 1 is going over some of the myths, and we talk about some of the pervasive sayings that we hear, mainly geared towards losing a lot of water weight really quickly and how that can affect performance. If you want to go back and watch that, you can. Then come right back here, because I am a physical therapist. I'm also a grappler. I also train MMA. What else? I have a doctor of physical therapy, which is not that impressive compared to having a doctor of brolosophy, which was given to me as an obvious gag gift by my buddies. I'm currently the only one in the world, I think, that has one. Kind of a big deal, but I cling to it with every ounce of my being. So that uniquely qualifies me to talk about this, particularly when 99% of you are males. Big old sausage fest up in here. Ladies, where are you at? Who knows, because we're all losers that live in our parents' basement. I'm alone talking to a camera in my room. Do I really have the expertise to talk about this? Who knows? But we're going to do it anyway. The agenda: basics of weight and fat loss. Okay, we really want to promote fat loss instead of muscle tissue loss during a weight loss phase or a hypocaloric diet, which is what we're going to be going over today, because we know that muscle retention is important for maintaining a good performance throughout our training, especially as we peak through our competition. I'm going to give you an example, a very basic structural example with all the math associated with creating a good hypocaloric diet that is consistent throughout the remainder of the diet. And then we're going to talk about if you should be cutting weight or not. Okay, the basics. Creating a caloric deficit. This is the number one most important thing when it comes to weight loss. That needs to happen when it comes to losing fat. I am not saying it is the only thing involved. I'm not saying that mental health doesn't play a role. I'm not saying that the presence of pathology that lowers your basal metabolic rate, which we'll talk about next, doesn't play a role, or mental health disorders. I'm not saying any of that doesn't play a role. What I'm saying is, without a caloric deficit, you cannot lose weight. And we're going to show you how to create one in this video. Okay? Establishing your BMR, your basal metabolic rate. This just means, it's a simple calculation of your height, weight, and your activity level. It just means that the amount of calories that you burn on a daily basis, given your activity level and your size. These are not exact calculations, especially if you go online and use one of the calculators. It gives you a good starting point. And you should play around with that before you start one of these phases to kind of see where you are, how many calories you need to take in to maintain the same level, or just stay in a maintenance phase. But that is a very important part of this equation. Another important part is the math associated with losing pounds of fat. So 1 pound of fat equals about 3,500 calories. And we're going to take that into consideration whenever we're building our diet plan. Excuse me. We want to make sure we're keeping it between 1 to 2% of body weight per week, because the research shows that this is where the adherence is the highest. And why are we even going to do this if we're not going to adhere to it? And it also keeps it safe because it mitigates how quickly you start to lose sleep and you start to lose recovery, because again, we are in a hypocaloric diet. If you remember what we talked about in the first video, you know that if you cut weight too quickly, your recovery starts to suffer and then your performance starts to suffer. And then we need to make sure you have the amount of body fat that's required to lose. You know, if you're, as Dr. Mike Israetel would say, well, gee whiz, if you're a single body fat percentage, why do you even need to lose weight in the first place? In fact, I would argue that you would need to, that if you wanted to get better and you wanted to chase a competitive role in either one of the two, let's say you're in between one weight class and the other and you're single digit body fat, I would say you should probably go on some sort of muscle building diet to get closer to the top of either one of those, or chase one so that you have more muscle tissue so that you could perform better. Your hypercaloric maintenance phase, I mean, gosh, you are going to get really good really quickly, okay? So I would argue going the opposite if you're single digit body fat, but if you have, like me, I'm at about 21% body fat right now, I could lose 10 pounds because I've done weight cuts before. But let's just get into the math and then we'll talk about it. So how to structure a weight cut. Let's say they're 28 years old. They start at 192.6 pounds, which is, I set this up so you're only losing about 10 pounds. I used the 83 kilo weight class for the ADCC, but since we're in the good old USA and we're using freedom units, I'm also going to include the pounds as well. So 192.6 pounds, which is 87.5 kilos, is where your starting weight is. Your goal weight is 102.6 pounds or 83 kilos, which is a weight class for the ADCC. And you got a body fat between 20 and 25%. So we know that we have a healthy amount of fat to lose even whenever so that we don't end up being at an unhealthy body fat percentage. And we have some body fat so that we're also able to perform well on competition day. So now we're going to come up with some parameters and calculations. So we know that we want to lose 1 to 2% of body fat per week. And we're just going to stick with 1 because we're going to be conservative with these numbers just to make it easy. So 1% per week would be 1.9 pounds. 1%, you move the decimal place over, 1.926 pounds, we're going to call it 1.9. But we're even going to cut it down a little bit more just to minimize the amount of weight we're going to lose and hopefully try to retain some of our performance through this cut. So we'll call it 1.5 pounds. So 10 pounds is the total amount that we want to lose. So we need to divide that by 1.5 since that's the amount of pounds we want to lose per week. That'll take us about 6.67 weeks. We're just going to call it 7 weeks. All right. So 7 weeks at losing 1.5 pounds each equals 10.5 pounds total instead of the 10. So you're going to be slightly under the 83 kilo. But that's okay, since you go on a maintenance phase, you'll very likely gain 1 pound or 2, and then you'll manipulate your water very lightly as you need to. So in order to create that calorie deficit, remember we want to lose primarily fat, so 3,500 calories. And since we're losing more than 1 pound of fat, if we were going to lose 1 pound of fat a week, we would just do 3,500 divided by 7 to give us the daily caloric deficit. However, we're going to lose 1.5 a week for 7 weeks. So we need to multiply it by 1.5, and 5,250 calories is the deficit that we're going to have per week. So then we divide that by 7, and we get 750 calories a day deficit for 7 weeks. And that'll give us our 10.5 pound goal. So we'll end up being 182, we want to end up being 182.1 pounds 4 weeks out. That's the very important part. I think where this is going to lose a lot of people is they're going to realize that they have to do a lot of work up front for this instead of just following the culture of losing weight the way that it has been done for so long. And you say, man, all I got to do is just drop 10 or 15 pounds in the last week and I'll be fine, of water weight or whatever. We know that, given the last video, we know that that is not ideal for performance, and you probably think that you're performing better than you are. So if let's say your peak for your comp is going to take 4 weeks, and probably take even longer than that. This is just an example. You can manipulate any of these variables as you see fit for your particular situation. But if your peak is going to take 4 weeks, which I think is a nice way to ramp up your peak for the competition, you have to start 11 weeks out, because you got 7 weeks for the cut, and then to maximize fat loss, and then you have 4 weeks where you're on a maintenance phase and you're really developing those skills. Remember, we talked about neuroplasticity. Your sleep is going to be better since you have more calories. Your performance at the gym is going to be better. Your central nervous system is going to take less of a hit even though you're training more because you're on a maintenance phase. Okay? So that's kind of how you would think about setting one up for your particular situation. Again, there are a lot of things that can be manipulated here, but you can use this trick. And if you have any particular questions about these, like how do I enter my calories, I use MyFitnessPal. It's a really good free example of how to do it. If you want me to do like a daily kind of breakdown of something that I've eaten, like for example, in a hypocaloric diet, if I've been through several of my career, so I'm very aware of how to do this. I'm very aware of my basal metabolic rate, blah, blah, blah. So let me know in the comments if you want to see an example of that. So now let's go into whether you should cut or not, because this is a very big deal. And it kind of ties in with the last slide of my last video about some of the psychosocial and cultural thoughts we have about cutting weight. where I said that we need to kind of bring cutting weight to the forefront of our thought every so often, just so we don't forget about the people who are actually suffering due to really bad advice that is being given or that's being kind of propagated throughout the culture. So the number one thing I would say is the history of body image or mental health. If you have a history of that, and this requires, a couple of these require really honest introspective assessment of yourself and how well you know yourself, because you know yourself better than anybody else. If you've got a history of body or mental health issues, I'm not saying that you can't cut, but I'm saying you should probably take more measures to decide if you could. So if you have a history of mental health issues, you're seeing a therapist, or you're talking with your primary care physician about whether it's a good idea, provided all the other checks are or all the other list of things that we talked about earlier are checked, making sure that it's healthy for you and your body. We are nothing more than our minds, if not our minds, right? So make sure that you're taking care of that and really easing in slowly, and perhaps maybe trying some mini cuts before actually trying to cut down and perform at the end of a cut. Again, we're talking about lower body fat percentage. I know it feels good to want to get the submission at the competition and be like, you like rip your gi off or whatever, and you got your abs popping and you're just walking around, like a juice, like Gordon Ryan or Nicky Rod, whatever. I know that sounds cool, but if you're doing it at the cost of your performance, you're probably going to get subbed anyway, and you probably won't be able to rip off your gi, and you'll probably walked off really slouched and be like, damn, I just fucking lost. Because I probably shouldn't have tried to cut that much weight. I was already 10% body fat and had visible abs, and could have ripped my gi off. I could have ripped my gi off, but I didn't. You know why? Because I was fucking stupid with my weight cut. Okay, if you've got experience with cutting, I've cut weight probably, 20 times in my life. So I know how my body responds to certain things and what foods to put in my diet and things like that. Those are all things that you figure out along the way. But if you don't have any experience with cutting, like I said before, maybe like the first example, if you've got a mental health or a body image issue, if you don't have any experience, you don't really know how your body is going to react. So you could end up losing way more weight than you think you should, and then your performance ends up suffering, or you don't make weight. Which is not a huge deal, but if you're a high-level competitor, it kind of is a huge deal, because you've tried to peak for this competition. You want to try to make a run at a title or whatever, or you want to see what you're made of on a national level in whatever federation, and then you just, you kind of ruin it. So I would play around with it a little. Try a little cut for 4 weeks, try to lose a pound of fat over the course of 4 weeks, and see how your body reacts to it, and then try to go into something like a 10-week or 12-week cut. Very sustainable and very persistent with what you're doing, and very intentional. And then take an honest assessment of your ability level. I feel like as guys, because like I mentioned before, it is a real big sausage fest up in this channel. I don't know what to do to get ladies to come on here and start watching, but we'll try. I don't really know how to change that. But I'm married, I haven't dated, I haven't had to spit game or Riz as the youth calls it. God, that was awful, and I'm sorry. But take an honest assessment of your ability level. You and I both know that there's a difference between the 40-year-old hobbyist who's been a blue belt for a couple of years, that wants to go and try his luck at a competition, and a 25-year-old guy who was a stud wrestler. And he's been training for like 3 or 4 years, and he's a blue belt. We know that they're not the same. Okay, that 25-year-old can probably start to perform at a national level, right? Probably take something like this seriously. But if you're just going to go try your hand at a competition, there's really no need to even think about cutting weight. This is just you putting yourself out there, which I think is a great thing. Putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, testing what you're made of, with somebody outside of your gym, okay, get a variety of looks, and see where you stack up. And if you don't stack up well, then that's fine. You got more work to do. Okay, I think it's very good for the psyche to do that. There's no need to add a level of stress when it comes to cutting weight to that. Okay, so overall, do an honest assessment of yourself from a mental health. If you've got previous issues, and your activity, or your, not your activity level, but your ability level, and make the judgment call accordingly. Next video, okay, we're going to talk about some advanced concepts. So hunger mitigation is huge, because if you're in a deficit for a long period of time, you are going to get diet fatigue. And I don't think 750 calories a day for some of you may be a lot. For me, it's not. I know what it feels like to be on a diet and have some diet fatigue. It doesn't really hit me until, if I'm doing a 750 calorie a day deficit, it really doesn't hit me until about 12 weeks. But that's also because I'm psychotic and I've eaten the same breakfast and lunch for like this last 2 years. So it's just a little bit different for me. But we're going to talk about how to mitigate hunger, maybe some timing, which segues into the next one, nutrient and meal timing. Timing your meals around training to make sure that you minimize recovery loss and things like that. Water loading and electrolyte manipulation could probably have been the same bullet point. But should you need to, let's say you're a couple pounds over where you need to be for your weight cut, there are ways to healthily, that's a word, healthily do the water loading and couple it with your electrolyte manipulation. Because let's be honest, again, our goal is not going to be like bodybuilders or powerlifters or Olympic weightlifters. I say powerbuilders, bodybuilders, powerlifters, or Olympic weightlifters, where you're using different energy systems, right? It might be a little bit easier to perform in those situations in a dehydrated state. It's not going to be as easy in our sport. Whether you're fighting or whether you're grappling, it's more demanding on your body, arguably, than for a longer period of time. And you're just using different energy systems, which requires you to be a little bit more hydrated and balanced from an electrolyte perspective. Okay, so if you guys have any questions, please send them to either my Instagram at Combat Athlete Physio or email them at combatathletephysio@gmail.com. I also have a Reddit thread, a Reddit community. It's very new to this, so I just started. So just post your stuff. I've got my LCL injury up there to get things started. But if you have any injury questions, you can also post there as well. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.